Hi everybody and welcome back to Ladies Lounge.
Honor-based abuse is any form of incident that involves violence, threats, intimidating activities, or abuse, and honor is used as the excuse for it.
Tragically, many of these abusive perpetrators remain hidden due to the cultural pressures or the fear of bringing shame to family or the community. Honor-based abuse is a violation of your human rights and should never be accepted.
Today's discussion is incredibly special as we raise awareness of honor-based abuse. We're honoured to have our guest Liz Kingsley, Director of Safe Arms, a non-profit organisation that deals with people that have been affected by domestic abuse and violence. Simphiwe Sesane, Contraception and Sexual Health Nurse Consultant, a Faculty of Sexual and Reproductive Health, and Gamilla, a survivor of forced marriage and virginity testing. She is using a pseudonym as she is still being bullied by her family. She joins us to share her experiences online today. It's an honour to have you all here, to share your stories, to share your background, to share an insight, and I pray also be knowledge to all of us, to break some shackles and to re-educate a lot of us in understanding the diverse worlds that you all come from and what you deal with. So I would like to start off, if you can tell us a bit about yourself, that would be really great, and what led you to start the charity that supports the girls that have been impacted by different forms of abuse and violence. If you could do that for me, please, Liz, that would be amazing.
Actually, I started this because a couple of years back now, probably about over 15 years, I worked as a housing manager in one of the boroughs in the UK. And there was this case in one of the houses where a 9-year-old was raped by a 14-year-old boy. A 9-year-old girl raped by a 14-year-old boy, yeah. And the girl, 9 years, was about to be relocated to the home country and murdered there because that was the tradition. And being in one of the houses where I manage, I had to represent her in Marak meetings. Obviously, at that time, I didn't know anything about domestic abuse, and my boss didn't also know. So he kept on telling me, go and read, go and read, go and read. So I was reading, and I learned a lot about this. However, as I was reading, I did not realize a vision was being birthed alongside. And so that's how I arrived here. So over time, I took lots of research programs on this, and I also became an independent domestic abuse advisor.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that's amazing. So that was, it's like a baptism of fire in some sense, that you experienced a living example testimony that actually birthed what you're doing today.
Yeah.
I definitely commend you on that, because it's not easy to run with a vision and just continue with it, but then also in such a, dare I say, a climax division, working with so many sensitive natured people, elements, laws, the list goes on. It's a lot to deal with. I just definitely commend you on it, and actually sticking with it, because we need a lot more people sticking to our visions, especially where we're empowering and supporting the next person. So definitely kudos to you on that. Could you please, for our viewers and people like myself that may be unfamiliar with what honor-based abuse is, could you just give a definition and explain to us what that is and how it differs from the word abuse itself?
Honor-based abuse is actually part of, domestic abuse, and obviously not acceptable, unacceptable to everyone. However, honor-based abuse is a bit subtle in the sense that it hides under culture.
Okay.
And they use honor as an excuse. So it's not like every other form of abuse. We have 4 main examples under honor-based abuse. We have female genital mutilation. We have the forced marriage. We have virginity testing, and we have breast flattening. So for female genital mutilation, in some countries they understand it as female circumcision. And in many countries, it's actually illegal. For example, in my country, it's illegal there. However, some cultures still practice this. And at a time where there are lots of interracial marriages going on, it's actually expedient for us, for the government, to raise awareness of this, at this time. And unfortunately, in many countries, or in West African countries, this female circumcision goes on when the child is small, like 0 to 3 months, when the child cannot even talk. So the mother has to stand in the gap and speak out for this female girl, In some other countries, female genital mutilation happens when they are older and they can run away or speak out for themselves. However, we have to take note of the silent ones who cannot say anything, but their mother has to stand in or speak on their behalf.
Okay.
So that's female genital mutilation. We also have forced marriage. So forced marriage is where a party or both of them do not give their full consent. And I'm telling you, this still happens in many countries. Yeah.
Is it prevalent in the UK still today?
Yeah, because remember, there are lots of people migrating, and people have been migrating for long now. So even though in the past couple of years, a lot more had come in. However, even from time past, people have been migrating. So people have been coming in.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and they give birth to children, and this culture still there. The only thing is just that it's not loud. Like, they wouldn't say, oh, this is our culture. Like the 9-year-old girl I told you about, who was ready to be relocated to the home country and murdered there. It happened in the UK. So, yeah, it happened here.
That's so surprising. I didn't even know that things
So
like that.
it's embedded in the culture. And forced marriage, for example, it's still there. And forced marriage is, number one, when a child is being asked to marry, whether with her consent or without her consent, a child cannot marry, cannot get married, cannot give full consent to a marriage. And we have people who are getting married to children, and that is one. Then when you come to the older ones, you see where adults are being forced to marry themselves because of culture. Yeah, it still happens. It does happen. And because of interracial marriages, like I said, it's expedient for this awareness to go on. Because people wouldn't know what they are marrying into. So they need to be educated, everybody. Because it's when they get there, they will realize what is in there.
Right. So I know you've mentioned about FGM, and you've also mentioned lightly about first marriages as well.
We also have Virginia testing.
Okay, cool.
Virginia testing is about people being tested whether they are virgins before they are married. And these things still happen, in this age and time. And some culture would say it's for health reasons. And it doesn't have any health reason, in here. But they use that as an excuse for them to know whether a girl is a virgin or not.
Wow.
Everybody deserves to have their private parts private.
Yeah.
And nobody should be tortured in that form, So we have that one. And then we also have the breast flattening, where hot objects are being put on the chest of girls, just for them not to attract males' attention, And these are young people who are being treated in this manner. And it is expedient for people to talk about it. It's expedient for this awareness to go on, because you could have secondary school girls who are going to experience this without their knowledge.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned these 4. Are there any others within the communities of colour across the UK that go on that we should all be aware of and look for signs for, or are they the most prevalent ones that are taking dominance across the UK at the moment?
Yeah, they're the most prevalent ones.
Right,
and remember the example I also gave you? So those ones are the most prevalent ones, and we should look out for them. because it is still being done in the UK.
So I'm sure it goes without saying there's going to be a huge psychological impact on the individuals that go through all these different elements. Not just them, but obviously their peers, those that are close to them, their families, and the list goes on. What support is there available in the UK for people that are going through it, or they've recognised traits of this taking place amongst their community or their friends, their families, and they don't feel comfortable within those communities? So I'm sure it's hard to speak up. What advice is there to support that, to help people psychologically first and foremost in the UK? What is the government doing? What are we as a people doing? Are there other different initiatives that we should know about to support all of that's going on psychologically for individuals?
I want us to realize, number one, that the UK government is trying laws. And speaking here, I am speaking on their behalf here. And they have laid down lots of things for people to be supported with. So this campaign really is about is UK government's strategy to raise awareness of violence against women and girls. And I've been speaking for them on this issue in the past couple of years. So this is not the first one. They've been raising this awareness from time to time just to help people. And they have put lots of support in place. Number one, we have domestic abuse, domestic violence orders, where which can protect victims from victims can always run away. It prevents perpetrators from getting near them. So when this order is in place, and they can easily get this, the police can help them. If they have support workers can also help them. So also in every borough in the UK, there are domestic violence hubs where people can run into and seek for help. So people need to speak out. They do not need to feel alone. They do not need to deal with this alone because they can't deal with it alone. So they need to speak up. They need to run to the nearest hub to them, nearest domestic violence hub to them, and they will definitely be supported. In almost all the boroughs, the UK government has opened up different hubs in there. So wherever they are, they can easily reach out for help. Also, we have Women's Aid helpline, which is quite helpful for them. They can go use that helpline, which is 24/7. It's also being done by the government. It's also being sponsored by the government. And so they can use that as well. Safe Arms also can be helpful to them. For example, we run refuge where people can be accommodated. So we have that. We also have some wellness therapies that we can use, counseling services that can help them. And so there are lots of support in the society. And that is why they do not have to stand alone. They cannot even deal with it alone. They need to run to the nearest place where they can be supported.
Okay. I will like to say as well, as a caveat, that if you are part of this community, you recognise this community, the advice that is being shared today will be available on the screen as well, and available through Ladies Lounge TV show as well, so you can get that at any point in time. Can I also ask as well, Liz, what are the early signs or red flags that we can look for in this type of abuse? Like, what will be the early onset signs that this is a possibility, it could be happening in this community, this family? How do we look for that?
Okay, thank you. Remember, I said that honor-based abuse is not like other forms of abuse. It is subtle, hidden, and honor is an excuse. And we have different kinds of people. Some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. Yeah. So they deal with it in different ways. Unfortunately, you may not have any red flag. Quite unfortunate.
That's even more scary. I'm not gonna
It's
lie.
more scary, yeah. It's scary, yeah. You may not have any red flag.
Someone like myself who comes from a community where I'm not aware that it takes place. I'm not saying it doesn't take place, but I'm not aware of that. But are there little things that I could probably look for? Is there certain age brackets that are probably targeted more than others? Are there certain things that I should be looking at to help an individual?
Okay. I believe if you have a friend, for example, experiencing this, they could probably give you some hints that they are passing through this. When people speak up about this, they may not speak so loud, but they can give you a hint that something is going on with them. And if they give you that hint, also educating the large community, whether they are going through it or not, it is very, very important. For example, this campaign is very important because even if anyone feels it is a honor in their culture, listening to this, they would know that, they are not safe.
Right, okay. So they could
Yeah.
recognize when you may not see it from the title, that honor-based abuse, but when you know the detail of it, you might know.
Yeah.
You've touched on it very lightly previously. Are there any specific laws that we need to look out for that we could let our viewers know briefly about?
There are domestic abuse laws, orders that government has put in place. The only thing is not anyone can just use it. So they need to go to the appropriate place where they can help them and be supported. So they can help them to, they can secure them away from, whatever culture with that order. So they need to approach the appropriate place. Either they go to the police, the police is even the nearest place they could go to. They can run to any police station and they will help them there. However, if they're afraid of going there, they could find the nearest.
Dare I say, could maybe the GP, your doctors, could your teachers also? Okay,
social workers, GPs, you can just run anywhere. Tell them what you're passing through and they will support them. Because GPs are also trained in all of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really good advice you've given. I really do appreciate you coming in and speaking about this. And there's a lot more to go into. Like, if you're feeling what I'm feeling, do not go far. Do not go far. We shall see you in 2 ticks on the other side for the next segment of what we're going to be talking about today from our other guests and open up the discussion. So see you on the other side. Don't go far.
Forced marriage is any form of marriage where one party or both parties do not give their full consent and they have forced them to marry.
It is not unusual to feel isolated if you or someone you know is being pressured into marriage.
Forced marriage is a crime in the UK. There are lots of protection for you as a human being.
No one has the right to control your life or your choices.
Forced marriage and arranged marriage are not the same.
In an arranged marriage, both people freely agree.
However, forced marriage, one of them or both of them are not giving their full consent to this, and that is forced marriage.
Welcome back, everyone. And so if you're just joining us, we've got some really amazing guests in the studio sharing some stories with us as well. So we're just going to move straight into it. Thank you so much, Gamilla, for joining us today. And so the first question that we just wanted to cover is, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in being forced into marriage? How old were you and what led to that whole circumstance?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Gamilla, a survivor of forced marriage and virginity testing. At the age of 26, I was forced by my family to marry my cousin, whom I've never seen or spoken to prior to asking for my hand in marriage. Even though my parents' intentions were rooted in what they believed was best for me and the whole family, at first I resisted the idea and made it clear that I wasn't ready for marriage. And when I do so, I will choose my own partner. But I was given an ultimatum to either marry my cousin or my family would have to cut ties with me. So the pressure was really weighing heavily on me, which forced me to make a choice that I may not have made under different circumstances. I ended up getting married to my cousin, but it was not a decision that was shaped by my readiness or feelings about marriage. Instead, it was a decision that was shaped by fear of losing my family.
And what was going through your mind at that time, Gamilla, like when you realized that you were being forced or pushed into doing something that you didn't want to do?
I felt torn between my desire for independence and my responsibility towards my family. It was really difficult to process the idea that my family, whom I love so much, could cut ties with me if I do not comply. So it felt invasive and left me feeling vulnerable.
I can only imagine how traumatic, for the lack of any better term, that would have been. And I think as part of this experience, virginity testing is another deeply, deeply personal violation. And can you share what experience you went through with that as well, and how did that make you feel about yourself?
Well, virginity testing is when an examiner would visually inspect or insert his or her fingers in a woman's vagina to determine if the individual has had any or has been involved in any sexual intercourse, which is just forged, not scientifically proven though. Yes, I went through virginity testing. Undergoing a virginity test was a very upsetting and uncomfortable experience for me. I felt my privacy was invaded. Unfortunately, I had to go through it because I felt immense pressure from both my family and cultural expectations. At that moment, I had no choice because I wanted to avoid further conflict with my family. It was a very difficult experience, but I believe it highlights the kind of pressures victims can face in similar situations.
I'm speechless just hearing your story, honestly. And you sort of alluded to this around the role that your family played. Did you have any support from anyone during this period?
Well, my family played a very complex role in this situation, to be honest. On one hand, their actions were often guided by cultural traditions and meeting up the extended family's expectations. And in some instances, this felt like they were pushing me further into these practices rather than fully considering my perspective or emotional well being.
I'm sitting here just in shock because in all honesty, Gamilla, this is the first time I've ever heard first-hand account of such that you're mentioning. So I do applaud you on your bravery and where you've come to today. I do want to ask as well, was there ever a moment when you thought about leaving, or did it feel impossible at first?
Yes, there were moments when I thought about leaving, especially when the situation felt overwhelming and I struggled to see a way forward. At first, leaving felt nearly impossible due to the possibilities of losing my immigration status because my residence permit was under his sponsorship, my husband, I mean, and the fear of judgment, the emotional ties to my family, social expectations, and also for the fact that I wasn't financially independent to be able to take care of myself were really weighing heavily on me. So the idea of leaving seemed impossible, and not just because of the practical challenges, but also the uncertainty of what could come next. But as I reflected on my values and prioritizing my well being, the thought of leaving became tangible.
So what was that turning point for you that gave you the encouragement to leave the situation? Was there a particular thing or pinnacle that you could pinpoint your finger on to say that that was your turning point to say enough is enough, you need to leave this situation?
Yes, there was a turning point. As my health began to deteriorate under the weight of suppressing my thoughts and emotions, and I found myself physically drained, struggling with hormonal imbalance, anxiety, and unable to bring together the energy to confront the issues that were weighing heavily on my mind. It was during those dark moments of despair that I had a profound realization that sacrificing my health and happiness to maintain silence was not just a sustainable or acceptable option. So, in the depth of these struggles, I made a conscious decision to prioritize my health and reclaim my voice.
I know you mentioned it very lightly before, but what was the biggest challenge that you faced after you left? What was it that allowed you, what was that big thing, should I say, that was there that you was like, oh my gosh, this is the big thing for me. Now I've got to deal with this. How do I deal with this? How do I rebuild my life? Where do I turn? What was that for you? How did it look?
The biggest challenges in moving forward has been rebuilding trust with my family and within myself. With my family, I struggle with the feeling of betrayal and hurt as their actions put me in the difficult situation I am in. And when it really, it has really taken time, like to communicate openly with them, set my boundaries, and begin to rebuild our relationship. In terms of my healing, I guess overcoming the emotional impact and reclaiming my sense of self has been a long journey. But finally, I have learned how to value my voice and choices again.
Okay. And with that, do you feel that it's you've rebuilt your relationships with your family to the point that your family now look at what they've done to you differently and they don't choose to inflict it on anybody else?
No, because they still believe that wasn't the right thing to do. Leaving wasn't the right thing to do. That I should have just coped with the situation. As a married woman, you go through so many challenges in your matrimonial home, but hoping that things might end up changing with him.
Okay. So, being where you are today now, what advice would you give to a younger you and anybody else facing this in this particular situation? What advice would you firsthand want to give to that person?
Well, my advice to everyone out there in similar situations would be remember that your voice and feelings are valid. It may feel isolating, but know that you deserve respect, support, and the freedom to make your own choices. Healing takes time, but then seeking help from trusted friends and professionals can be a valuable step. Even when it feels difficult, there is always a way forward, and you are stronger than you might realize. So please, please, please seek help and break the silence.
That's beautiful. I've just got one more last question to ask you, just for myself right now, is if there's one thing that you could change about the way communities and families approach forced marriages and virginity testing, what would it be?
In my community and others with similar practices, I would like to see a fundamental shift towards respecting individual freedom, gender equality, and human rights, which includes ending harmful practices such as forced marriage, FGM, and virginity testing. I envision a community where young people, especially girls, are empowered to make choices about their bodies, education, and future without fear of force or violence.
Wow. Well, thank you for definitely taking the time to share this and be a part of today's show. I know I've definitely appreciated everything you said. It's an eye-opener to even understand that in our world today that this is actually taking place. I'm now feeling like I probably live under a bushel somewhere, because I didn't know that this actually was happening in our world today, around the world, or even in my own doorstep. So I do appreciate you and all of our guests today for sharing this. Was there any other questions that anybody possibly had, or thoughts about the subjects we've been discussing so far at all, that you might want to share or throw out at all?
I would like to add that in the Black community, one thing we should understand as one of them is anywhere we go, we carry two things with us, and that's our faith and our culture. So wherever you move to in the world, we carry our faith and our culture, and we don't hardly drop them. So what that simply means is that culture and faith have effects on people from time to time and wherever they go to. So this thing, honor-based abuse, is embedded in that culture, and everyone needs to be educated on this. Also, in the faith community, we have leaders who are quite influential, and they listen to, their members listen to them because of their place of influence. And so faith leaders, community leaders are in a good position to also educate the community and to signpost people to the right places. In actual fact, community leaders and faith leaders, most likely they'll be the first point of contact for anyone passing through this. And so they need to know, they need to learn, be educated, and be able to know where to signpost people to when this is going on with people. Yeah.
And I think you touched on a very good point around education. You know, I think in order to eradicate like stigma and shame and all of these different sort of things that do occur in our community, I think education is a huge piece that needs to come with that. And I think to add on the information that you said earlier as well, in terms of in the UK, there was over 14,000 cases in the last year of FGM reported. So
In the UK?
In the UK.
Let's say that a bit again. In the UK, there was 14,000.
Yes, there was 14,000 cases.
That
so
we
that
know
could
of.
have been cases where it was going to happen or has happened. So that just gives you a context, and that's actually grown by almost 2,000 since 2023. So it's still happening, and I think it's something that we still need to educate people on, because it is still practiced. But the great part is that the UK has also changed the laws, so you can get, you know, in a lot of trouble as well. You're breaking the law essentially if you're taking somebody back home to have FGM performed as well. And I think also having that, you know, even if you're a resident or you're from the UK, you're born here, you are protected by the UK law. So I think that's a great thing that they've added as well in terms of the law.
That is good
because
to know.
people used to take people home,
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh, but it didn't happen here.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's important that actually, even if you take somebody home, you're still breaking the law. So people need to know that as well.
I think that's a good point
Interesting.
that you've added.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. That is really, really interesting to know a lot of the stuff that you guys have said. You've just heard a little bit, and I mean a little bit, from Simphiwe, and she's going to share a lot more with us. So join us back in 2. Let's take a break, and we shall see you on the other side. Thank you to our guests so far, Gamilla and to Liz, and we're going to hear from the wonderful Simphiwe next. See you soon.
Virginity testing is a myth.
Virginity testing does not prove if someone's a virgin. Virginity testing is neither scientific or reliable.
A girl's worth is not tied to whether she's been sexually active or not. Breast flattening is also known as breast ironing.
It involves using hot objects or pressure to stop breasts from growing. It's abusive and harmful. It's a violation of human rights.
Breast flattening does not protect girls in any way or form. It is actually harmful to the body system.
It's a physical abuse and should be reported. A girl's body is hers to grow naturally and healthy. No one should harm a young girl, in the name of protection.
Every girl needs to feel safe, respected, and protected.
Welcome back, everyone. I think I'm not the only one that can say today's topic is heavy, but we just applaud all of our guests for being here, openly sharing and raising awareness around critical matters that are happening within our community. I was saying during the break that some of this I've been quite oblivious to. I didn't realize it was happening on our doorstep. So Simphiwe, just before we went on a break, you touched on something that shocks me. I think my mouth was even wide open, which was that in the UK, there's 14,000 cases of female genital mutilation. So I think some of our viewers might not necessarily know what that is. So could you please explain for anyone that doesn't know what female genital mutilation is, what it is, please?
So FGM is where they basically cut or remove parts of the female genital, the external genitalia, and a lot of the time it's, for cultural reasons. There's 4 different types. So it could be just the removal of the clitoris and the clitoris hood, for instance, which is type 1. It could be removal of the labia minora, which is the inner labia, including the clitoris, or it can be complete removal of the clitoris hood, the labia minora, which is the inner labia, and then doing a stitch down basically to create sort of close the vulva or narrow it. So there's different types, and there can be different variations in different cultures of what they practice, but that's basically FGM in a nutshell. And in terms of cases, what I was sort of alluding to is that those cases might not necessarily been FGM performed. It could be that a protection order's occurred because they were planning to take somebody abroad, for instance, due to FGM. So it's not necessarily occurred cases, basically.
And so is it something that is quite prevalent in it sounds it, in the UK community?
Oh, definitely. It is prevalent because a bit like Liz said earlier, due to migration, people still, people move with their culture and their beliefs, essentially. So the education that is required, around the laws and why we should eradicate some of these practices needs to continue, because people migrate and still believe in these practices. And obviously in the UK, generally, it doesn't occur as much than in different countries, but it's still something where people are taken back home to perform these procedures.
Okay. And so what are the physical consequences of a female that undergoes FGM, like both in the short term and in the long term?
So short term can be things like infection. A lot of the time it's not carried out by a medical professional. There's not sterile equipment being used. There's no anesthetic. So there is obviously the pain element and the emotional and psychological trauma that it can cause that individual. There can be urinary issues that can occur. So retention, because that individual might not want to go to the toilet. There could be period issues as well, due to, the stitching, especially if they've got type 3. So those kind of sort of procedures can obviously impact period and urination, and meaning in terms of infection, there's greater risk of infection once again.
Yeah. Wow.
And then if we're thinking sort of long term, for that individual as well, later on, potentially sexual intercourse could become very painful. And just chronic pain in that area for a lot of women. So I think in terms of discovery and actually management, people don't sometimes have help until beyond 18. So this could have occurred, I think it's something like 30% happens between the ages of 5 and 9 years old. So they would have been silenced for all those years.
5 to 9
is majority, sort of in terms of UK statistics. But there is also people we don't know. So all these statistics also need to be taken with a pinch of salt, because again, a bit like Liz was saying, it's silence. So we're not necessarily, there's a lot of people we probably don't know and have never spoken about it. So we always need to, interpret these statistics with caution.
With caution. And I think you touch on a good point there, because it sounds like FGM is deeply culturally rooted.
Definitely.
But so from your experience, do families feel pressured to do this even when they're living in the UK, which is you know, like the culture is quite Western here. So why do people still feel the pressure to
I guess
adhere?
we move with our cultures and our
Yeah.
beliefs are still sort of ingrained in us. And I think it's multifactorial, but I think sometimes what happens is that, you know, to be accepted within the community, you still need to, you know, adhere to these practices.
Yeah.
There's beliefs around, you know, fertility. So some people think that it actually helps your fertility, but that's obviously not necessarily true. There's other beliefs around sort of hygiene or, you know, women being promiscuous, you know, if it's not performed. So it's to make sure that you retain your virginity until you meet your partner. There's so many other reasons, and I think they vary in different cultures, but it's just important, I think, we continue to talk and educate in order to, you know, generally break down that stigma and, you know, really getting people to talk out about what's happened and not normalize that this is still happening today.
Bearing in mind that honor is also the major excuse.
Yes.
Yeah, to honor the family.
Yes.
Yeah. So they educate, the culture is about educating that they need to bring honor to the family.
But it's such a private thing, like
Yeah.
as in it's happening to your private area. So no one's going. Do they publicize that this is happening, or
they
my
have-
daughter's
well,
had her?
Yeah, they have ceremonies. So they have ceremonies which are known as celebratory ceremonies, actually, in some cultures where, you know, you're now a woman once you've had FGM. So they are seen as, you know, a big celebration to welcoming you to like womanhood and things like that. So I think, yes, the education around sort of that is sort of important. And yeah, the honor aspect is really, and I think they change between honor and the culture and religious and, you know, making it sort of religious. So it's sometimes very intertwined.
So, as a healthcare professional, how did you feel when you first encountered somebody who had undergone FGM? How did you feel? How did you deal with it as well, yourself personally?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. Being a health professional, you're constantly encountering things which you're like, you know, really shake you up, you know, and make your skin crawl. And you just, I think the key thing is you're always conscious of that individual and providing care to that individual. So, you know, really active listening. And I know it seems really weird saying active listening, but really listening to that individual, you know, and creating that safe space for them to share openly and have that conversation. And also finding out what they want to do. Because I think sometimes, even if somebody shares something, you need to actually know, what do they want you to do? Do they want you to do something with that information? And I think you have to respect that, because sometimes, especially if obviously FGM was something that was going to occur, you have to share that because you're safeguarding that individual. But if it was something like they've already experienced it, you know, knowing which paths you can refer them, because you might refer somebody to counseling, but they're probably not yet ready to undertake that. So I think it's also finding out what at this stage, where are they in terms of the healing and what are they wanting from this consultation is really important, because sometimes actually they just want to have that conversation, build that rapport with you, and you tell them that it's an open door, you can come back again. They come back again, they have that conversation, and then they might be ready to then meet the next person, which might be a counselor. So I think it's really important to build that safe space and that open door that you can come back and we can do things at your pace, because I think sometimes we do things too fast and that individual's not ready to deal with it at that point in time. And we talk about all these referrals, this place, you can go here, but that's actually quite frightening for a person, especially it's very vulnerable. It's already something quite personal that they've shared with you. So I think it's always important to, you know, ask them where do you want us to do? What do you want us to do right now? And just, reassuring them that, you know, they're not alone.
Okay, fair enough. So, what psychological, emotional scars do women often carry as a result of FGM? What kind of things do you normally see of how it impacts their lives?
I think the betrayal, I think, you know, the lady before touched on it so well. I think that betrayal from sort of family, you know, I think, like she said, it takes a long time for that to heal, you know, the psychological impact of that, never goes away. And some people have experienced FGM at an age where they remember everything. They remember that aunt or that uncle. They remember being held down, and that will live with them forever. And I think creating spaces, safe spaces for these women to be able to go and get the support is very important. And also just, always I think the education piece shouldn't be just now, because there's this activism, but it's a constant thing that we should be doing.
Okay. From the legal perspective, both yourself and Liz have touched on it quite lightly as well about that, which is totally understandable. But from a FGM side point, what legal practices are being enforced to protect individuals who are undergoing FGM?
Even if you live in the UK, you don't have to be a permanent resident, but even if you are currently living in the UK or you are a British citizen, then if you're taken elsewhere to have FGM performed, then that's illegal and you can face prosecution. And anybody else who's also, so let's say your mom took you back home and your father was there as well. So everybody involved is basically can be prosecuted, especially if they are from the UK. So I think it's not only, the fact that it's happened back home, but it's any sort of people who are part of it as well. There's also a fine that can be imposed as well. So you can, depending upon the situation, it can be one or either or both, basically.
So the UK government really supports making sure that this is not taking place in the communities.
Oh, definitely. And I think they're working really hard to try and sort of get those cases early on. So even in schools, they're doing education around sort of FGM, so that if a child mentions, oh, we're going on this special trip, because often kids are prepped into this special trip that they're going on. So sometimes actually recognizing that early on for the teachers as well is important in flagging those. So some of those cases I was talking about, the 14,000, is cases where they might have even confiscated the passport. So not allowing that individual to be able to go home because they're suspecting potential FGM.
So refreshing to hear that it's part of safeguarding practices in the schools as well.
But can I say something? I think it's expedient for anyone passing through it, either the mother of the child or the person herself, to find an agency that can support them. The reason is because they pass through trauma, the experiences, they bring some of the things that they experience is trauma, stress, shame, and different other things. So it's important for them to move away from that culture and be in a different environment where their lives can be rebuilt.
To start their own culture.
To start their own, exactly. So it's quite important for them to be, and honestly, if they call Safe Arms, we're able to either help them or signpost them to the nearest hub around them.
That's really good. That is. Simphiwe, what can communities, especially Black African and Black Caribbean communities, do to raise awareness to put an end to FGM in the UK, do you think?
I think we need to keep talking. We shouldn't be silent. This is affecting our community and has, detrimental long-term impact on individuals. So I think we need to continue to talk about it. We need to continue to raise awareness. We need to continue the education piece. And I think it shouldn't stop in this element in terms of the activism that's happening now, but it should be an ongoing thing. And I think, you touched on it around the faith leaders. A lot of the time they are the ones that people will go to first. So also, leaning on our faith leaders is so important, our community workers and different areas where Black communities go to is intrinsic.
I know you mentioned at the top of the segment that FGM is different from male circumcision. That's it. Could you briefly explain how it is different? Because somebody may, and I know in my head it's ticking off, how is it really different? And why are we allowed to do one over the other? could you briefly mention the
Yeah,
difference?
no, of course.
Yeah.
So in male, so it's basically the removal of the sort of the foreskin area. And why that's different is that actually there has been research to find that actually circumcision in male is more preventative in terms of sexually transmitted infection acquisition or spreading of infection, like especially like HIV. So it's different in that aspect because it's more preventative. Whereas in women, it's a lot of the time, we've already touched on the fact that it's done for, you know, the honor aspect, but also its control and it's, you know, it's other, we've spoken about sort of why it's, you know, it's detrimental. It's very different for male circumcision for sure. You know, for this, it also affects women's, you know, ability to have sex, enjoy sex and things like that. Whereas for men, it doesn't.
Okay.
Is it reversible?
Unfortunately, a lot of the time they've cut the areas away, so it's not reversible. But what they might do is that they might do a procedure where they open the area, especially if they've done a stitch down.
Okay.
So they will open the area just to make it a bit more comfortable for the woman, especially things like urinating or her periods, or if she's, you know, during childbirth as well. You know, if they've narrowed it quite sort of far, she might not even be able to have full penetration. So there might be areas where they might open, which is known as deinfibulation, but it's not reversible, especially if they've cut areas away.
I'm so stunned right now because I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, I'm a woman. How would I feel? I would go berserk. But I'm also respecting that everybody has their different cultures and how they're raised. So when you're born into something, you don't see it as that. So I also respect that. But the word honor is a big thing as well, because it's like it's a scapegoat that is hiding under the word of honor. Yeah. What would you say to young girls, women who are facing FGM or possibilities of it, signposts of it in their lives? What words of encouragement would you say to them about that, and what hope would you give them as a reassurance?
So I would always say, you know, you're not alone. Speak out, seek help. There's help. I feel like Liz has touched on it sort of nicely in terms of what are the resources that are there, but there is help. And speak out. Don't be silent. And yes, it might be really hard because you know of how much the family, you know, believes in it. But then, you know, the change has to come with you sort of speaking out. Because obviously if you don't speak out, then potentially it could go the other way. So it's important to speak out and seek help.
Awesome. Wow. Today's show, that's all I'm going to say. I know I will be watching this on repeat and repeat because I know I probably might have missed some things just sitting here today. But I do take the time to say thank you to you ladies for being here, for sharing this knowledge, because without that knowledge, how would we grow? How would we be able to help each other? And to our guest Gamilla as well. We're all going through different things, secretly, privately, openly. But one thing I will say that I've learned from today, as well as knowing as a independent Black woman, that there is help out there. And the help is always available to you. Even if you think there isn't, there is always going to be help. There's a glimmer of hope. So if you or anyone you know is going through any of what has been discussed today, please do get in touch with the agencies that I've mentioned. For instance, like Safe Arms. The details will be available through Ladies Lounge. So all the phone numbers, all the contact details are there. And do remember that everything will be said that you say is said in confidence. It's not something that is going to come out and it's going to be said on LL Tips or anything like that. No, there are professional standards in place, but definitely speak up. We wish you well in everything you do, but make sure that you stand proud for you and you speak your voice. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you on the next one.
FGM can lead to lifelong pain, trauma, childbirth complications, and even death. There are no health benefits of an FGM.
No one is allowed to hurt you physically or emotionally. You have a right to say no to any form of pain.
FGM doesn't control sexual desires or prevent infidelity. If you have experienced FGM, there is nothing to be ashamed of. Talk to someone you trust.
Honor-based abuse is a violation of human rights.
You do not have to condone these behaviours, even if you are told they are part of your cultural traditions.
Wrong is wrong. You do not need to feel ashamed in any way. Honor-based abuse is a crime and it is illegal.
There are organisations and helplines here to listen without judgment to help you find a way forward.
Reaching out for help does not mean you are betraying your family.
It means you are choosing to protect yourself and take back control of your life. Please know that there's hope and people who care deeply about your safety and future.
If you or someone you know is experiencing honor-based abuse, please reach out for help. Call the Safe Arms helpline on 078 77 586 338 for free and confidential support, or you visit our website safearms.org.uk for more information. You are not alone. Help is available.